The word coward clung to the stone like frost. It had been shouted once, loud enough to shiver birds from the church eaves, and then smaller versions followed, under breaths, through crooked smiles, around the corners of mouths that wanted to be braver than they were. In the center of the square, a young soldier sat on a low step, helmet in his lap, jaw tight enough to turn anger into a headache. Around him, a ring of villagers and off-duty soldiers formed the shape a crowd always makes when it wants to convince itself it is righteous. "Coward," someone repeated, quieter now, trying out the power and finding it still warm. The soldier's name was Terin. He could carry 60 pounds of gear over the ridge path without cursing. He could cut willow switches into neat lengths for bow practice and never split one. He could hold a line for a minute and a half against a training post that swung back at him like a real man. He could do all that yesterday at noon. At dusk, he could not lift his head. A wagon creaked across the cobbles, its driver pretending not to watch. A dog threaded the crowd, nose down, uninterested in the bloodless sport of insults. The sky had the bruise yellow of a storm somewhere else. Banners hung limply from iron rings, their blue faded by cold, their gold catching what little sun remained and making more of it than was fair. Garen Crownguard came up the south road with his pace set to steady, not fast. He was not a man who hurried often. It was difficult to move faster than duty and not look clumsy. Blue and gold found him easily, as if the colors had been waiting. His armor was practical, kept cleaned because steel survives when it is respected. His shoulders were broad enough that doorways had learned to step aside. The broadsword on his back sat where it belonged, too large for anyone else and exactly the right size for him. The leather wrap on the hilt polished not by vanity, but by years of hands. A boy who had been throwing pebbles at a post saw him first. The pebbles forgot to fly. The boy's mouth opened. The sound he made was not a word. It was the shape of permission to say one. Garen. The name traveled faster than the wind, faster than regret. Heads turned. The ring around Terin loosened by a pace, then tightened again, a reflex, like a muscle unsure whether to flinch or fight. Garen didn't ask what had happened. He looked. The square tells its stories out loud if you give it a chance. A spilled bucket near the well. A scuffed patch where someone had been dragged or had stumbled and stood again. A smear of mud on Terin's gauntlet. Palm side, not knuckle side, meaning he had crawled or pushed with an open hand. A coil of rope discarded, half unraveled, hastily used, hastily abandoned. He noticed what wasn't there. No blood on Terin's tunic, but a red thread at the edge of his collar, like guilt trying to sew itself into the cloth. He took the broadsword down as a man takes off a cloak. Economy, habit. He let the sheath's throat ring the blade with one clean sound. It passed through the square like a thought becoming a decision. The crowd, which had found itself committed to a kind of cruelty and didn't know how to stop, remembered how to listen. Garen set the tip of the sword on the stone between his boots. No flourish, no threat. The weight of the blade sent a small vibration through the ground that Terin felt before anyone else. Garen's voice followed, not loud but effortlessly heard. Who started this? No one wants to be first to admit to smallness in front of a man who makes you stand a little taller by accident. A soldier with a scar that stopped short of his eyebrow stepped forward. Vale, older than Terin by a decade and proud of it. He wore his experience like a scarf thrown casually and pointed at. He froze, Vale said, jerking his chin at Terin. On the ridge road. Raiders came over the cut, we stumbled. He was at the front, didn't move. We had to pull him back like a wagon stuck in mire. Terin's hand flexed over his helmet. He said nothing. Garen turned his head slightly, acknowledging Vale's words without swallowing them. Who else was there? He asked. Rook, Vale said. A younger soldier nodded quickly, eyes bright with the prospect of being important. Ren, Kala, and the new lad from the river, Jonas. And the villagers? Garen said, because soldiers never fight alone, not on land. Land has people on it. The miller raised a hand halfway. My boy and I, he said. We saw from the bend. Garen nodded once. He did not judge by nods, but he allowed them. Terin, he said at last, the name like a hand held out across a gap. Tell me what you remember. Terin lifted his head. He took time before he spoke, not to fabricate, but to gather. We were 3 turns from the cut, he said, his voice rough at the corners. Rook was stopping to check the footing. I saw dust where there shouldn't be dust. I raised a hand to signal. Then they were there, 5, maybe 6. Fast. They didn't want to fight. They wanted the mules. His jaw shifted. I moved forward to block. Someone fell. Jonas. He went down hard. I reached for him. Someone hit my shoulder. We bunched up. He swallowed. Then the rope. It was across the path, belly high. I took it. I put my arm over it so it wouldn't take my throat. I couldn't move without leaving him. You froze, Vale said, satisfied to find his version inside Terin's. I held, Terin said, meeting his eye. It wasn't defiance. It was a correction. I held the rope so it wouldn't gut him when they pulled. He looked at Garen again. I held too long. They took the mules and were gone. The square exhaled, the uncertain sound people make when the shape of a story tilts and they have to lean with it, or fall. Garen glanced at Terin's shoulder. The seam pulled, the bruise just below it, the mark a rope leaves when it tries to teach a man to bow. And Jonas? Garen asked quietly. The younger soldier swallowed. Alive, he said. Bruised. Angry. He's in the infirmary. Garen let stillness lay a blanket over the square just long enough for shame to get cold. Then he lifted the sword a hand's width from the stone and let it drop. The steel's voice climbed up through boots and into bones. One deep, resonant note. Listen to me, he said. Demacian measures in actions, not accusations. If a man freezes and his comrades fall because of it, I will say so. I will say it to his face and then to the commander who signs his pay. And I will bear the cost with him because I did not train him enough. He looked at Terin. But if a man holds a rope and a boy lives because he did not move, I will say that too. Vale's mouth worked. He had been building a story all day that made him right, and Garen had walked in with a heavier tool. He should have cut the rope, Vale said. He should have. Cut it with what, Vale? Garen asked mildly. His free hand? He let the question walk to its conclusion. Vale followed and did not like where it went. You were there. Garen continued. Where was your knife? Vale flushed under his scar. Where was yours, Rook? Garen asked without looking away. Rook stammered and gestured toward his belt, where a sheath lay empty. And yours, Calla? Calla lifted her knife in its place, silent. Garen nodded to her, then to the square. We will examine our gear later. For now, you will stop saying the word you do not know how to carry. Coward is heavy. If you cannot lift it with both hands, truth and consequence, you do not get to pick it up. The wind found its courage and tried a gust. Banners flicked. Someone coughed into a fist that was not trying to hide anything. The ring broke a little. Garen stepped back and let the weight of his words do what they were made for. He turned to the miller. You and your boy, he said. What did you see that the soldiers could not? The miller scratched at flour caked along his fingernails, thinking. I saw the rope, he said. It had sun on it, looked new. Good sisal, not the kind you find in our sheds. The hit on the shoulder, I saw that too, from the left. The raider who swung didn't want the fight. He wanted to make room to run. He moved like a man counting to 3 and stopping at 2. Garen smiled with half his face. You see well? He said. I've watched wheels roll wrong my whole life. The miller said. You learn what off looks like. Garen set the sword back on his back, the motion so practiced that a child could have traced it without looking. He pointed his chin toward the armory. Training yard, he said to the soldiers. Now. Then to the villagers. If you came for entertainment, go home. If you came for justice, you will get to watch it being made. It is slower than you prefer. They moved. Work has a way of teaching people where their feet belong. In the yard, Garen laid a coil of rope across 2 posts at shoulder height. He set 4 training dummies in a stagger along the path and a 5th where a man would have fallen if his foot caught. He chose a knife from the rack and weighed it, not for balance. Steel is steel, but to remind himself what he could expect of other hands. Terin, he said, stand where you stood. Terin did, his breath steadying in increments, the face of a man who has decided to be honest no matter how much it costs. Vale, Garen said, take the rope, pull when I say, not before. Vale nodded, jaw set. Calla, Garen said, you stand where you stood and do what you did. Calla's mouth twitched. What I did was look for the threat in the trees, she said. I thought we were about to be flanked. Good, Garen said. Do it again. Rook, he said last. Where was your knife? Rook swallowed. On the ground, he said, mortified. I dropped it when I threw for the first raider. Missed. Pick up another, Garen said. And keep it this time. Garen walked to the start of the path. He turned to face them, the weight of the sword on his back reminding him that some tools are also lessons. When the rope comes, he said, it will happen faster than you want. That is the nature of such things. Your body will ask you to make a small decision quickly. You will have time for exactly one. Choose the one you are willing to remember. He nodded at Vale. Pull. Vale yanked. The rope laughed across the posts and snapped against Terin's chest. Terin threw his left arm up and over, pinning the cord with flesh and armor. He grimaced at the new bruise awakening the old one. Knife, Garen said. Rook reached. He hesitated for the half-second it takes to discover your own doubt. Kala, eyes on the trees that were not trees, called. Left, out of habit. Garen stepped in, not with speed, but with the kind of certainty that looks like speed. He took Rook's wrist, put the knife in the right grip, and guided it to the rope where Terin's arm made space for the blade to bite without taking skin. Cut, Garen said. Rook cut. The rope flinched and died. Terin stepped forward as if to cover the man he'd held. Garen raised a hand. Enough, he said. He let the silence do its count. Then he said it. Again. They ran it until hands stopped thinking about what they wanted to do and started doing what they were supposed to. They ran it until Rook's fingers forgot how to drop steel. They ran it until Kala's call came from the back of her throat without fear riding it. They ran it until Vale's arm pulled not for shame, but for demonstration. They ran it until Terin's shoulder shook and he shook his head no, and Garen said, "Yes, sit," and no one thought less of him for obeying. When they finished, Garen set the knife back, coiled the rope neatly, and looked at the crowd leaning on the yard's fence. "This," he said, "is how we become what we claim to be. Not by shouting at a boy and calling him a name you wouldn't survive being called yourself, by practicing the moment until it stops surprising us." He turned to Vale. "You accused first. You will apologize first." Vale's mouth opened to argue, and found no words that would stand. He walked to Terin, the path short and longer than it should have been, and looked at the younger man. "I was wrong," he said, the words thick. "You held when I would have stepped back." Terin studied him. "We still lost the mules," he said. "We did," Vale replied. "We won the boy." Terin nodded once. It was enough. Garen let the nod be the end of it. He didn't keep men on their knees after they had made the right shape with their backs. He dismissed the soldiers. He did not dismiss the responsibility that sat heavily on their shoulders. Responsibility has a way of following men into sleep and asking questions at inconvenient hours. He went to the infirmary. Jonas sat up at his approach, a bruise flowering along his collarbone, his pride more tender than the bone. "You angry at the right thing?" Garen asked without preamble. "I'm angry that they're louder than what happened," Jonas said. "I fell. He kept me from dying hungry on my own breath." He flicked a glance toward the window, toward the yard where the fence still leaned. "You made them see. I gave the square something else to look at," Garen said. "Seeing is up to them." He left Jonas to the practical kindness of a bandage that itched. In the courtyard, the air had a different shape. People spoke of supper and duty in the same sentence, which is as good a measure of morale as any chart. Garen took the sword back to his quarters and set it against the wall with the care of a man hanging up a truth. There was work to do that had nothing to do with the Ridge Road. The armory's inventory had gaps. Not many, but enough that a clever bandit could smell them. He walked the racks, asked questions not with suspicion but with an accountant's calm. "Where is this? When did it last get oiled? Why is there a crack in this shield's rim?" He wrote names in a ledger, not to punish but to remember. Memory is the root of discipline. Discipline is the ground under the house. He ate quickly. Bread, stew, a slice of something that wanted to be cheese more than it had succeeded. Then he went back to the square. The banners looked less tired. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe it was the way a village stands when it has survived its own pettiness for a day. The headman approached, hat in hand because some customs are older than any king. "You're staying the night," he said. Not quite a question. "I am," Garen said. "I want the ridge at dawn." "There's talk they'll try again," the headman said. "Mules are blood to the villages east." "They'll try again," Garen agreed. "Because they haven't learned a better way to eat. We will teach them different hunger." At midnight, the alarm bell complained itself awake. Voices scrambled. The yard filled with men and women who had slept with their boots near enough to find. Garen was already moving, buckling, not rushing. He gathered Terin, Vale, Kala, Rook, and 3 others with good hands and better eyes. He sent 2 to the path behind the miller's shed, the shortcut men take when they think they invented shortcuts. He sent 1 to the belfry to watch for the quick dark of figures moving where shadows did not help them. He sent a pair to the well because thieves as often go to water as to coin. He took the ridge with the remaining 3. The path was unkind, snow crusted and unwilling, but it had been worse and would be again. The night was the kind that keeps secrets too well. Clouds dragged low, the moon borrowed. Garen kept the men close, not because he feared they would wander, but because closeness teaches itself. They found the first raider by the smell of his breath when he turned to signal to a man who wasn't there. Garen said nothing. He moved in a way that made the man's knife seem like a child's bad idea. He put him on the ground with a twist that made the man consider honesty as a life plan. "You have two choices," Garen said softly. "Learn to count your neighbor's children as your own, and work, or keep thinking that rope is a good idea and starve louder." The man blinked. He chose silence. Garen tied him to a post he had set earlier for this exact inevitability. Preparation is better than prophecy. At the bend, two figures wrestled with a mule's halter. Rook didn't drop his knife. Calla didn't call left when she meant right. Terin didn't wait for the rope. He cut it before it could be thrown, the blade glancing off his bracer. And then he did the thing that would be remembered longer than any fight. He didn't chase. He stepped back to where Jonas would have fallen, as if the boy were there again, as if the position itself needed guarding. The raiders ran because thieves dislike friction. The bell settled into a pattern that meant, "It's fine now," a rhythm the village had not heard in months. Garen stood until the last footstep had become a rumor. Then he turned and walked back with his men, not triumphant, not exhausted, simply finished. In the square, the ring formed again, the way rings do around fires and fights and facts. It was smaller this time. Garen put his blade point down on the stone. He let it rest there, and for the first time that day he allowed the edge to sing. A half-turn, a controlled sweep, a demonstration of balance that made the air vibrate. The sound was not magic and not mercy. It was craft speaking in a voice even the angry could admire. The blade roared, not with volume but with certainty, and the square answered with quiet. "This is what we are," Garen said. "Not perfect, practiced. The difference between the two is the time you spend when no one is clapping." He looked at Terin. "You will take the morning watch on the ridge," he said. "Not as punishment, as proof." Terin nodded. It landed inside him like something finally in the right place. Garen turned to Vale. "You will teach knives for the next week," he said. "You will start with how not to drop them." The fence pretended not to smile. Vale didn't pretend. He grinned, brief and genuine, because he understood the gift inside the command. "Calla," Garen said, "you will teach listening. If you ever call left wrong again, I will make you teach it for a month. I will call it right forever," she said dryly. "But I accept the terms." He faced the villagers. "You will get your water before dawn," he said. "You will keep it where it belongs. You will not hoard rations from neighbors who will be on the line with you tomorrow. You will stop using names you have not earned the right to use." He let that settle. "And you will fix that fence," he added, pointing to the yard where a panel sagged like a lazy shoulder. "Because every time I look at it, I think about the ropes you hang on it, and I don't want to think about ropes today." Laughter came. Careful. Not at Terin, not at the raiders, but at the fence and at themselves for letting it lean so long. Morning rolled over the roofs with honest light. The mill wheel turned where it had sulked yesterday. The well's rope squeaked a little less because someone had found oil. Bread tasted like it remembered how to be humble and proud at once. Garen walked the east wall and checked stones with his palm, as if walls could be praised into holding. He found Terin on the ridge, awake the way men are awake when sleep has made promises it intends to keep later. The young soldier looked older, properly, not sadly. Garen stood beside him the way approval should, close, unannounced. "I keep replaying it," Terin admitted. "Where I could have moved, where I should have shouted, where I—" "You held," Garen said. "Then you learned. You're done with yesterday now. Keep some of it for company, but don't let it drive." Terin let that live in him for a breath. "They'll say something again," he said. "Someday when you're gone." "They will," Garen agreed. "People like the taste of certainty when they are hungry. Feed them better. Show them work. Make it loud enough to hear." Terin looked at the sword. "When you set it down," he said, "it makes a sound. Like, not a shout, but it fills the space." "Steel has a memory," Garen said. "So do stones. So do men. Remind them." He left the ridge when the sun had convinced the square to start believing in the day. He inspected the armory again, and this time a knife that hadn't been where it belonged was back in its place, oiled, apologetic. He walked the market and bought a spool of sisal rope from the trader who swore he'd never seen one like it before. Garen said he would hold him to that oath. By noon, the headman came with a ledger and 2 questions, one about grain storage and the other about a boundary stone moved by a winter drunk. Garen gave him answers that would work until spring. He wrote letters in the afternoon, one to a captain in the city about supply gaps, one to a woman in the hill country who had once saved his life with nothing but a rag, a needle, and the stubbornness to push both through skin. At dusk, he stood in the square where it had started. The stone step remembered Terin's weight and did not complain. A child ran after a dog that was not interested in being a metaphor. Someone hammered a board onto the fence, straightening the sag that had been in Garen's eye since yesterday. The air smelled like work that had decided to become home. He set the tip of the blade down once more, not because the square needed reminding, but because he did. The note it sang was lower than before, satisfied. A pot on the boil turned to a simmer. He lifted it and sheathed it. "This is not a story about a man with a sword," he said under his breath, because sometimes the person who needs the words is the one who says them. It is a story about a square that learned how to use its voice. At sunrise the next morning, he was gone. Not like a ghost, that would have been dramatic and useless. He left a note for the quartermaster with an inventory and 2 jokes that would make him grind his teeth and fix the problems out of spite. He left a coil of rope in the training yard, tied the way he wanted to see it tied henceforth. He left Terin with the morning watch and the knowledge that the ridge looked different when you were the one decided upon. On the road out, he passed the miller and his boy. The boy tried to stand taller without being caught doing it. Garen didn't catch him. He approved him. At the bend, he looked back. The square did not look at him. It looked at itself. That is how you know something has taken. Stories traveled as they do, faster than pack animals when they are fed by mouths with nothing better to chew. "He came when we shouted," someone would say in a market a week away. "He put the blade down and it roared," someone else would add, meaning the way silence can roar when shame has to sit quietly for a while. They would get parts wrong. They always do. They would leave out the fence, the ledger, the knife's second homecoming. They would forget the miller's hands and the way Kalla's voice learned truer directions. But some details would stick. That the word coward did not get to live long there. That a boy did not die alone on a road cut to suit a thief. That a village learned to practice its courage in the daylight so it could find it in the dark. And in the city, when a captain asked Garen for a report, he gave it plain. "Mules lost," he said. "1 recovered. No dead. Training improved. Discipline mended." He did not mention the sound the sword made when it spoke, not because it wasn't important, but because it wasn't his to report. That sound belonged to the square now, and to people who had learned to make it on their own, with knives held right, with ropes coiled neat, with the large, quiet work of becoming who they said they were. When the wind turned weeks later and carried a rumor back up the South Road, it said this: "There's a place where coward won't stick. If you try to throw it, it falls to the stone and dies. If you have work to do, you can hear the blade roar, not because steel is magic, but because men remembered how to listen to what actions say when they are done clean and in time." And somewhere between one village and the next, Garen walked with the weight he preferred. Not the sword, though he wore it. Not the armor, though it fit him. But the certainty that his job was not to make speeches when a blade could teach. The blade had spoken. The square had answered. That was enough.